If you don't know what fascism is, you cannot defeat it. If you don't know what third positionism is, then you really need to. Know thy enemy and know thyself, and ye not fear the result of 1,000 battles, to quote Sun Tzu. And I just want to point out that the enemy is the ideology, not the people who have fallen for it. And I just want to make that clear. Sadly, the majority of the populace live in ignorance, and we are being told that fascism has no coherent ideology or philosophy. We are being told it's just when racist thugs and stuff do capitalism. But is this really the case? Well, how about we listen to what the Third Positionists are actually saying?
But with the nominalist revolution, you get this initial rupture. There's this great book by Gillespie called The Theological Origins of Modernity that I'm working through at the moment, which is fantastic. And it talks about how this theological development in the 13th century, in which the kind of Aristotelian realism was disentangled from theology, and through basically meditations upon the omnipotence of divinity, problematizing our capacity to have any faith in any forms of categories of knowledge independent of their provision by the authority of the divine. And then ultimately you get the Protestant Reformation a few centuries later, in which the category of revelation is elevated above scriptural authority and priestly interpretive authority. And these two forces are then combined with these other factors that create this anti-authoritarian, nomadic, Indo-Aryan spirit. And these things kind of reach a point of inflection in which you get the Enlightenment, you get the kind of severing of the connection of our understanding of knowledge and its relationship to divinity, as though divinity spoke being into existence. Instead, now divinity is administered to by a transcendental subject in Cartesianism or Kantianism or whatever, or even in empiricism to a certain extent. And so all of these ontological developments, cultural tendencies, create this kind of perfect storm that give rise to the kinds of moral hysterias, or at least light the fires that set a chain reaction in place that produces liberalism and humanism and all of these reactions. Now we're at this point in which we're looking back upon this and trying to make sense of it and try and find a ontological position that is itself revolutionary and innovative to kind of get out in front of this dialectic and then use that energy to hopefully be part of a trajectory, momentum that can head beyond liberalism into a post-liberal direction.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? I understood what they were talking about, but you may or may not have done, and for the moment it doesn't matter. The point is that what we just heard was not just racist thugs and stuff. It wasn't just bigotry. Clearly we have intellectuals here, and they're talking about a lot of philosophical concepts that have, no doubt, gone over the heads of most of the people watching this video. Now, the clip I just played was from a video titled Tracing the Origins of Liberalism by Shandon Simpson. He also goes by the name Zoran Zoltanus. I'm going to be calling him Zoltan going forward because I'm a fan of FTL, and we'll be hearing more from Zoltan as we go through the video. But he's not the only one saying this sort of stuff. Here is someone else from a now deleted YouTube video.
And so what you're seeing now, drag queen story hour and all these things, this is a function of liberalism. This is the doctrine that the individual comes before the collective, comes before the state. And if you believe something, if you believe that you're a different gender, if you believe that you're oppressed, that's sacrosanct, that's above everything, that's above the interests of the collective. The collective doesn't get a say in how people should conduct their personal lives. And that's in contrast to a national socialism, a collectivism that isn't interested in everything solely through the lens of personal freedom, but is interested in the collective good and maintaining the people that make up that state. These distinctions just don't mean anything anymore. The only distinction that matters, and if you want a common thread of what our enemies are pushing, if you want to look into, the who question, it's hard to find a common thread of socialism in these people, because if you look at the who's and you say that they're the pushers of socialism worldwide, well, that's true, but they're also the pushers of capitalism. Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, Robert Nozick, on and on. Those people are all from that group, and they're all capitalists. So if you want to just say that it's communism versus capitalism and the white man is defending capitalism, that's utter nonsense. These people are on both sides of this. They're on the two sides of the materialist coin. And the real common thread of what they're pushing, whether it's communism, so-called communism, or capitalism and the Chicago School monetarist economics, the common thread of it is individualism, and it's weakening the state. When they push leftism, it's to weaken the state. It'll weaken the ethnic makeup of the state. It'll introduce multiculturalism. It'll reduce solidarity among workers because of multiculturalism. Or if they're on the other side and they're Milton Friedman also pushing open borders, they'll also be pushing for weakening the state, removing state power. They operate in this fantasy where you can have a world, we can just get rid of power and individuals will just fill the role, and it'll just be dispersed equally among individuals by the hidden hand of the market. But that's not how it works. Monopolies exist, oligarchies exist, ethnic cohesion exists among groups that won't be playing by the same individual rules. And so those groups fill the power vacuum. And you can ignore this all you want, but you're fundamentally not operating in the real world if you do. You're not recognizing reality. And so if you want a common thread of what we're opposed to, it's not the left, it's not communism, it's individualism, it's liberalism, radical liberalism. That's what we see. Drag queen story hour, transgender children. This is all the doctrine of radical liberalism, sovereignty over one's own body, no gods, no masters, no state, no nation, nothing beyond the individual will. It's this postmodern relativist quagmire, and that's what we're opposed to. And you can't fight that with individualism. And the alternative is collectivism. And if that word collectivism makes you shudder because you think of the Holodomor, or you think of the skulls of Cambodia or whatever, can you really call yourself a nationalist? Nationalism is collectivism. You can't be an individualist nationalist. Alright, capitalism is the doctrine, and this isn't saying that we're going to abolish free trade between people within a state, and we're going to get rid of businesses. That's not what capitalism is. There's free enterprise and there's capitalism. And capitalism today is the idea that capital comes first, that individual rights come first, and that the nation is secondary to that, the state is secondary to that. Capital can move where it likes, and the state has to just operate to capital's whims. If you're a nationalist, you think capitalism is secondary to the nation, to the people. And that makes you a collectivist, because that means that you're going to be willing to sacrifice these so-called individual rights if it comes in conflict with the nation. If your people are being destroyed because of something like someone's right to make a profit or someone's property rights, you're not going to be afraid to stamp on them if that's necessary for your own survival. So if you're a nationalist, you're a collectivist. And the battle is collectivism versus individualism.
Again, it's very interesting, isn't it? This person, Keith Woods, who has 66,000 subscribers on YouTube, doesn't sound very capitalist thugs and stuff to me. He's rejected Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand, and it's clear that he has a hatred of capital and capitalism. He thinks businesses should operate for the nation, which is the opposite of what someone like myself, a free market guy, wants. And regardless of what you think about what he's saying, we can all acknowledge that it's not just thugs and stuff. The points he's making are far more intellectual than I think many of you would have suspected to hear from a Nazi or whatever. But I think it's worth clarifying what Keith Woods is saying here. Third Positionists believe that both the capitalist right and the Marxian left are all liberals. They think they're all selfish individualists, they're all materialists. If someone identifies as being trans, let's say, they, the Third Positionists, think that they're only doing that for selfish reasons. And the argument is that the capitalists want to be selfish and greedy, but so do the left. It's all being done for their own individual hedonistic pleasure. And the Third Positionists are saying that this is all morally wrong, and then claim to offer the opposite of individualism, which is collectivism. Theirs is, of course, not the fake collectivism of the Marxians, but a real collectivism, which they describe as nationalist collectivism. Here is a statement issued by the American Union of National Collectivists on the 3rd of September of this year, 2024. I asked on Twitter for clarification about why the Third Positionists see the Marxians as individualists, and someone sent me this, so thank you to that person. Keith Woods is an Irish Third Positionist. These guys are American, and yet they're saying the same thing. And I'm going to read it in full, but I'm going to put on a voice so that the audio can't be taken out of context by my enemies to try and say that I stand for this stuff, which I obviously don't. So let's read through it. Freedom without responsibility is anarchy. We live in a period where degeneracy and demoralization are more common than moral character. Many people will argue that degeneracy is not a genuine concept, and that times have simply changed. Yes, times have changed, who denies this? But do we consider these times to be brighter or darker? What could have resulted in such a major shift in the way our society perceives its ethics in a few short decades? Our society places its biggest emphasis on the concept of freedom. A perverted concept of freedom at that. Freedom is too often confused with selfish individualism. Freedom is not the ability to do as one pleases. Freedom is not unrestricted civil liberties due to the absence of government. In reality, freedom is one's ability to forge their own path and fulfill their potential in a framework. It requires responsibility to your community, nation, race, and serving for a higher purpose. Freedom is collective. It is to empower the individual to contribute meaningfully. Its intention is not to let you perform at the expense of another. So when our foes criticize us, we offer a rebuttal. We indeed believe in freedom, not selfish individualism. America and all Western democracies are what we call individualist, not free. There is a high regard over material and personal gain, but not so much for the betterment of the nation and race. Individualism, in its form we see today, promotes a false sense of freedom where people act without considering consequence. That leads to moral decay and a lack of purpose. Individualism has created a society where people are more concerned with their personal rights and personal freedoms, but neglect the well-being of their fellow men and nation. Too much of an emphasis on this idea undermines cohesion and leads to a society where true freedom, the ability to serve your purpose orderly, is near impossible. To victory and further, join this place for further information regarding the AUNC. These thoughts are echoed by the philosophical founder of fascism, Giovanni Gentile. Fascism, in truth, does not oppose itself to liberalism as a system of authority against a system of liberty. It sees itself rather as a system of true and concrete liberty as opposed to abstract and false liberty. And by false liberty he of course means liberalism. The reactionaries who want to continue to exploit any section of the community in their own selfish interests. The financiers who want to gull the public out of their money. The international moneylenders and rings and trusts in industry. All these are combined with the liberty mongers to make a united front against the next step in the liberation of the people against poverty. In plain English, the Third Positionists believe that liberalism is tyranny, freedom is slavery. And on that point, they are correct. Liberalism hasn't been about individual freedom since the 1860s, which is when it got usurped by socialists. I covered this in one of my videos on Mosley. Well, the Third Positionists think that they are offering a true freedom, a true liberty, which can only be given within a framework. That framework, of course, is the totalitarian state. They see the illiberal world that we live in, and they think that the solution is another kind of illiberalism. They don't see it like that, but they're just offering more of the same. It's just a different variant of what the others are offering. But from a philosophical and ideological stance, the Third Positionists believe in nationalism, collectivism, and not in all cases, racism. and it's clear that they're against selfish individualism, free markets, and capitalism. They are anti-material, anti-materialist, and they're calling for something higher, something more than just base materialism. What they think is that the rest of us just operate on our animal instincts, just giving into our senses, whereas they exist on a higher, spiritual plane of existence.
He, the Jew, is joyous, full of animal spirits, ambitious, thoughtless. He drinks and gambles, he hunts and robs. With the Jewish people, the readiness for sacrifice does not extend beyond the simple instinct of individual preservation. Jews act in concord only when a common danger threatens them or a common prey attracts them. Where these two motives no longer exist, then the most brutal egotism appears, and these people, who before had lived together in unity, will turn into a swarm of rats that bitterly fight against each other. Employers, workers, consumers are at present occupied in a bitter conflict, each for their own interests. Under financial democracy, morality has sunk to a low ebb. It is a case of eat or be eaten in the fierce struggle of modern commercial competition. There is little cause to be proud of success when success is attained at the expense of others. Darwinian survival in the realm of nature may have tended to improve the species. Economic survival in the realm of commerce seems to degenerate the race. The predominance of Jews is not surprising. They possess the attributes suitable to survival under these conditions. If the Jews were the only people in the world, they would be wallowing in filth and mire, and would exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle, except insofar as their utter lack of the ideal of sacrifice, which shows itself in their cowardly spirit, would prevent this struggle from developing. For the Nazi worldview, the human warrior ethic had drawn certain limits that differentiated it from animal instinct. In the German language, we have a word which admirably expresses this underlying spirit of all work. It is Pflichterfüllung, which means the service of the common weal before the consideration of one's own interests. The fundamental spirit out of which this kind of activity springs is the contradistinction of egotism, and we call it idealism. By this we mean to signify the willingness of the individual to make sacrifices for the community and his fellow men. The only sections of the community who will find that a fascist state will put a curb on their activities will be those who organise themselves for the purposes of furthering their own advantages at the expense of the community. The benefit of the whole, and not of any section, will be the guiding rule of fascists when they are in power. This is not tyranny. It is a fair and just view based on common sense.
Well, common sense isn't sensible. Due to old-fashioned anti-Semitism, Jews were often forced into the role of moneylenders, which then meant they were some of the early financiers during the rise of capitalism. Thus, the Jews and the bourgeoisie, plus the idea of capitalism, became entwined. Even Karl Marx believed this. I have an entire video on it.
What is the worldly cult of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money. Money is the jealous god of Israel, besides which no other god may exist.
Well, in Mein Kampf, Hitler says that the Jews can't create nations, because before 1948, Israel didn't exist. And so he says that only Aryans can create nations. From this logic, he comes to the conclusion that if Jewish blood intermixes with the blood of everyone else, there would be no Aryans left, and since only Aryans create nations, civilization would collapse.
The people that fails to preserve the purity of its racial blood thereby destroys the unity of the soul of the nation in all its manifestations. A disintegrated national character is the inevitable consequence of a process of disintegration in the blood.
So the best way to explain the way that most third positionists see the world is that the Jews would be the financiers in the shadows who have the aim of breeding with everyone else and mixing their magic civilization killing blood with the magic civilization creating blood of the Aryans. So it appears that the majority of third positionists think that the Jews are promoting liberalism as a way to do this. Liberalism would create Jewish-funded capitalism, bringing about class antagonism, which would be resolved by Jewish-funded Marxism. When Judeo-Marxism is in power, they think there would be no way to stop the interbreeding of the Jews with the Aryans, resulting in the collapse of civilization.
Hitler thought he was trying to save the world.
And so the third positionists are against the Jews, against liberalism, against capitalism, and against Marxism. But they're only against Marxism because it's perceived as being Jewish. Contrary to the accepted Marxist interpretation, Hitler was not an opponent of Marxism and did not want to destroy it because he was inimical to Labour, but because he was caught up in the insane idea that Marxism was an instrument of the Jews for the achievement of world domination, and above all because he rejected internationalism, pacifism, and the negation of the personality principle by Marxism. They don't like Marxism because they think it's Jewish and liberal, not because they're against socialism. In fact, they don't class Marxism as being real socialism. They think Marxism is an instrument of the Jews and thus in the pockets of the capitalists. And in opposition to that, third positionists are for a national version of socialism, which they think will be able to resolve this whole Jewish problem, the Jewish question.
I will happily say that I'm a socialist, and if you want to talk about, in a more positive way, what's the reasons for socialism from a nationalist perspective? Well, first of all, I believe in a meritocracy. I don't believe in the meritocracy that libertarians pay lip service to. I believe in a real meritocracy. And a meritocracy requires ethical socialism. You want a pro-social socialism. What we have now is people that call themselves socialists who are radical liberals promoting an anti-social socialism. I'm for pro-social socialism. I'm for the state using its power, using taxes, using spending, using monetary policy to produce certain outcomes. We have a mixed economy. We have it run by internationalists. We have it married to the values of internationalism. But we have an alternative which is far more popular among ordinary people, which is this mixed economy socialism married with nationalism and married with traditional values and married with a more idealistic view of the world that isn't just this massive open borders shopping mall. And we're going to use these tools to produce positive ends that will ultimately transcend our individual self-interest. And so we're not afraid to use words like socialism, collectivism, collective will, and we're not afraid to use the state to implement it.
I've been explaining for years now how the National Socialists are socialist, and I've been showing how the misinformation out there about how Hitler privatised the industries and all that stuff is false. Hitler nationalised the industries under the policy of Gleichschaltung, forced synchronisation. He didn't crush the unions, he nationalised them. I have multiple videos on this, and here again we have actual third positionists declaring themselves to be collectivists and socialists, explaining how they are against capitalism on both an ideological and philosophical level. And in their minds, individualism and capitalism is Jewish, which is exactly what Karl Marx said. And this is why when the Marxians call fascists capitalists, they're actually calling them Jews. Obviously, Aryans are not Jews, and they're not capitalists either. The Marxians are so far off the mark that they may as well pack up and go home. And this is why so many third positionists have videos refuting the idea that they are capitalists. Zoltan has a video titled "Is Fascism Capitalism in Decay? Introduction?", in which he says, no, fascism isn't capitalism in any sense of the word.
Before getting into this, I recommend everyone to go check out Culture Thug's and Keith Wood's video on his Fascism, Capitalism, and Decay. They both provide good points in their videos refuting this left-wing lie. It's arguably as big of a lie as fascism having no philosophy and therefore being incoherent, when it obviously does have a philosophy. See Giovanni Gentile and Alfredo Rocco with actual idealism, or Carl Schmitt and Heidegger for existentialism, along with the adoption of syndicalism and nationalism for both said ideological foundations of fascism and Nazism.
Cultured Thug's channel has been nuked from YouTube, although you can find it on Rumble, and I think Keith Woods' video on this has been taken down too. It wasn't even on Rumble last time I checked. But the point is that the Third Positionists keep making videos explaining why they are real socialists. The now removed Keith Woods video I used earlier was titled Reclaiming Socialism from the Left. I'm not sure why it's been taken down, maybe YouTube censored it or his views have changed, but he does have more videos up on the subject, like his Capitalism versus Socialism video, where he argues that the capitalist and liberal merchant class destroys order.
So, with the perpetuation of liberalism and individualism, what that comes from is the destruction of old orders, the disenchantment of older modes of being, the loss of the heroic way of looking at life, the heroic approach to life, and the move to what Nietzsche calls, this pitiable condition of the last man that's purely concerned about comfort. Now, I'd say that this is the ethic of the merchant class that was being imposed on people. This was the merchant class doing away with the priest caste and the warrior caste. The ethic of the warrior class and celebrating the heroic, that's done away with, that's deconstructed, that's gotten rid of in favor of a more individualist way of looking at things. The priestly class, their metaphysics, scholasticism, these traditions of European thought, that's done away with in favor of other ways of looking at things. So this is, the merchant worldview is really imposed. But what you get with the modernists is, they're adapting to the great economic, technological change of the time.
This is a very Platonic way of looking at the world. He's split the world into three castes, just like in Plato's Republic. You have the philosopher kings, the priestly class, then the warriors and the merchants. And he obviously thinks that the merchant class shouldn't rule the Republic which he wants to build. But regardless of your thoughts on this, it's clear that this person is knowledgeable on these topics. It's not just thugs and stuff. It's got a deep philosophical backing, and we need to recognise that. Take a look at this.
And that's really where the current of individualism and relativism leads. The contradiction of relativism in terms of how it plays out is it relativizes everything, but what's left is the relativizer, the self that is doing the relativizing. And what you end up with is just this anthropocentric justification for the irresponsible or the autonomous, completely autonomous from any sort of social responsibility or collective or higher ideal. You're just left with the expression of the will as the moral good.
Bearing in mind that this is 30 minutes into an unscripted video, and he's coming out with stuff like this. So this isn't just talking nonsense and thugs and stuff. There is actually a lot of thought that's gone into this, and other videos on his channel are looking at Nietzsche and Julius Evola, which is apparently pronounced Evola. And I really want to do a video where I answer Keith Woods' problem, because I think I can actually answer the existential issues he's facing, but that's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to get you to recognize that these people aren't stupid. They're not dumb. They're not just racists and that's it. They are more than that. And if you think that they're just thugs and racists, you are underestimating them. I do not underestimate them. I've seen it a few times on the internet where people go up to debate these people, either in video or in the comments or on Twitter, thinking that this will be an easy win. They'll smash the fash. and then they get absolutely obliterated by them. And it's not because the third positionists are correct in what they're saying, it's because people don't know what they stand for. They're essentially entering the arena blindfolded and then wondering why they're getting beaten. And as I said at the beginning, Sun Tzu said, "Know thy enemy, know thyself." So the censorship that has been imposed upon us, or his self-censorship, has backfired. The very thing that was meant to shield us from these ideologies has now weakened us and made us vulnerable to these ideologies. Now the good news is that Third Positionism itself contains multiple factions. They are not a united front. They are as fractured as the Marxians are. And so there are different viewpoints within the wider movement, and I have explained previously how fascism is not the same as National Socialism, and more recently I've identified the origins of these two ideologies, and they're coming from different places, although there is some overlap. So this is why some of them sound very different to others within the same Third Positionist umbrella. A while ago I did a video on another fascist text called Fascist Economics and Socialism of Duty. This text comes from the group known as the Iron March, which may now have been defunct. Nonetheless, it's worth just reminding ourselves of what they said.
It should be obvious by now that fascism does not seek material wealth as a goal in of itself, regardless if it's for individuals or a collective. Moreover, fascism, striving to make human society coincide with the cosmic order and the truth, note the capital letters here, does not favour obfuscation of one's personhood, but to the contrary wants to develop it to its full potential, which is different for every man based on their place within the cosmic order. Our goal, in short, is creating the organic state where everyone is in their rightful place, striving to realise themselves and in doing so contribute to the realisation of the nation, the race, and the ultimate truth. The definitive aspect of socialism as social order is that it necessitates adherence to duty, which removes petty individual interests entirely, thus negating individualism and collectivism as rival social structures, and subsequently negating capitalism and communism as economic forms in their purity. This socialism of duty, by necessity, has to figure out and develop one's personhood to understand his place in the social order, thus also realising his place in the cosmic order.
Again, just like with Keith Woods, there is actually a sad element to all of this, and I will come back to talk about it in another video. But it should be clear to you that there's a spirituality going on here. They do not like that people are free, or that people are pursuing their own selfish interests, or collecting money and material things. Like most religious people who operate on some divine spiritual level, they see this as an inferior way to live. And just like most ideologies and religions, they're offering a spiritual, cosmic order as an alternative. They're saying it is your duty to the social order and the truth. They have capitalized these words because they're not being used in the way that we would use them in everyday language. There's an esoteric, a secret, religious element here. The truth, with a capital T, means God. The cosmic order is Plato's world of forms, which is just God said differently. Your duty to God is now your duty to the social order, which in turn is now a substitute for the phrase kingdom of heaven on earth. And what we have is the process that Leonard Peikoff described in The Cause of Hitler's Germany, or in his History of Philosophy series on YouTube. Most of these ideologies are coming from ancient philosophies and religions updated by idealists like Kant, Hegel and Giovanni Gentile into their modern form. I've started to map this out, as many of you saw in my recent Where Do Our Modern Ideologies Come From video, and I'll be updating that map as we move forward. In fact, I already have updated it slightly with a new version, which you can find in the description of that video. I've also talked about the definitions of fascism and National Socialism before in previous videos, saying that there are differences between the two movements. To remind ourselves, James Gregor in the book Mussolini's Intellectuals says that Italian fascism is
the totalitarian, cooperative, and ethical state, the final collectivist synthesis of nationalism, syndicalism, and actualism.
Actualism, or actual idealism, as it's now called, is Giovanni Gentile's neo-Hegelian philosophy, where the material world around us is created collectively in the human mind.
Whatever is found is either invented or constructed by thought, and can be nothing other than thought. For the modern scientist, natural or mathematical science is not imagined to be a representation of an independent reality, but a construction fashioned by the spirit. Nothing transcends thought. Thought is absolute immanence.
Now, there's historical and philosophical reasons for why Gentile came to this conclusion, which I can explain some other time. It's to do with the problem of universals. But clearly, fascism does have a philosophy and a definition, and the modern Third Positionists are saying this as well.
In addition to a YouTube channel, Zoran Zoltanus has a Substack page where he writes articles on fascism and Third Positionist philosophy. In his article on What is Fascism, he gives a different definition of fascism than the one James Gregor gives, and I think it's worth reading about it because I've seen this elsewhere as well. He says, ultimately, Griffin synthesizes his understanding of fascism into a concise single-sentence definition. It's a genus of political ideology whose mythic core, in its various permutations, is a palingenetic form of populist ultranationalism. Zoltan says, let's break down the concepts here and how their synthesis is what creates fascism. The three are palingenesis, ultranationalism, and populism. Palingenesis. The theme of rebirth is prevalent in many traditions, from the spiritual renewal symbolized in religious rituals like baptism to the belief in the soul's reincarnation across different lifetimes. He then says this isn't quite the way that the fascists mean it, but it is. It's the Hegelian and Hermetic concept of Aufheben, which he admits later on when he says, fascism's efforts to initiate a new era reminiscent of historical virtues can be likened to a phoenix rising anew from the ashes, a metaphor for transformation and renewal. This echoes the Hegelian concept of sublation, where the old structure is both negated and preserved, paving the way for a new, elevated order. Fascism seeks to deconstruct the existing system, but maintains selected cherished elements to forge a societal model it deems superior.
I've been over this Hegelian concept before, so I'm not going to go through it again today. The point here is that the fascists are using the same concepts that a religious and Marxist movement would, because they're all coming from the same place. And a free market guy like myself would not normally be sat here talking about sublation or Aufheben, because these concepts have nothing to do with us. But the fascists believe in these concepts because they are socialists. And socialism is a religious movement coming from the religious philosophies of old.
Ultranationalism. Ultranationalism, especially when linked to fascist ultranations, is an intense form of nationalism that elevates one state or people's interests above all others. It differs from regular nationalism in its belief in the inherent superiority of a particular nation, often coupled with xenophobia and a mythical focus on national unity as if the nation were a single living entity. It encourages a personified view of the nation and usually backs authoritarian governance. This ideology paves the way for the formation of fascist corporate states and endorses cooperation across social classes. The economy is organised via entities like guilds, corporations, estates, and syndicates, leading to a tightly controlled society envisioned as a collective organism. He then quotes from Dollfuss, the fascist leader of Austria, who says, "We want to do away with class warfare. We want to accustom our people again to the idea of vocational solidarity, vocational rights and duties. The idea that master and man, the so-called employer and employee, are in opposition to each other must disappear. They must learn that they belong to each other, that they must collaborate harmoniously in human society for their mutual good and for the good of the community as a whole." Zoltan continues, "At times, conservatism can manifest a form of ultranationalism that stands apart from fascism. This type focuses on xenophobia and the concept of an organic society as means to safeguard existing or bygone social frameworks from perceived deterioration." He then goes on to say that Franco is not a fascist, but a conservative ultranationalist, which is actually what Hitler considered him to be as well. Later on he says, "It's important to correct the misconception that ultranationalism is exclusively tied to the framework of a nation-state. Ultranationalism can take on forms that go beyond traditional national boundaries. For example, it can encompass an entire race, forming a supranational identity that supersedes the boundaries of individual states. In other words, it can be international." That's right, international fascism. This can be observed in cases where multicultural societies give way to areas characterized by ethnic homogeneity, a notion referred to as ethno-pluralism. Instead of advocating for a single, all-encompassing fascist state, this belief system supports the establishment of a mosaic of distinct, self-governing regions across the globe. Furthermore, ultranationalism can manifest without any formal state structure, as illustrated by national anarchism, which proposes that the ideal ultranation consists of racially homogeneous communities functioning without a central government. Regardless of the particular logic or form it takes, the ultranationalist goal within fascism always relies on uniting a group of organic members to achieve its vision.
Yes, national anarchism. I mean, what's next? Environmental fascism? Actually, yes. Eco-fascism. Eco-fascism, sometimes spelled eco-fascism, is a term used to describe individuals and groups which combine environmentalism with fascism. The fascists think that fascism can save the penguins, and solve acid rain and control the weather. And you might say, no, this can't be a real thing, but you would be wrong. Keith Woods has a video titled The Environmental Effects of Immigration, where he argues that immigrants coming from poor countries to the richer countries in the West end up becoming greater polluters and consumers. This, he says, results in overcrowding, urban sprawl, the loss of biodiversity, greater carbon emissions, higher electricity consumption, increases in cattle and therefore methane output, and all of this, he says, exacerbates the environmental issue.
Anyone that calls themselves an environmentalist and defends the current levels of immigration into Western countries shows that they care more about the pseudo-diversity of multicultural Western societies than the natural diversity of the natural world, which immigration and overpopulation is actively destroying. An environmentalist that promotes mass immigration is not worthy of the label.
So, now that we know Nazis are in alignment with Klaus Schwab, let's take a look at how inaccurate the mainstream media is with their definition of fascism.
Even now, Wikipedia states that the definition of fascism is complicated and highly disputed. It says fascism as an ideology is also hard to define. Yeah, we have already defined it twice in this video, so it isn't that hard, is it? Elsewhere it says, Opposed to anarchism, democracy, pluralism, egalitarianism, liberalism, socialism and Marxism, fascism is placed on the far right within the traditional left-right spectrum.
Well, no. It's not opposed to anarchism because national anarchism is a thing, apparently. It's also not opposed to pluralism, as we just heard Zoltan explain. And it's definitely not opposed to socialism. It's opposed to Marxism, but not socialism. And labelling it far right is nonsense. If fascism continues to be wrongly placed next to capitalism, an economic system it fundamentally rejects, it's no wonder why people are abandoning the traditional left-right political spectrum. In his video, Is Fascism Capitalism in Decay?, Zoltan gives the correct definitions of fascism, National Socialism, socialism and Marxism. I actually agree with his definitions, which are correct as evidenced by Gregor and Griffin. In fact, his definitions of socialism and Marxism are in alignment with those that I described in my old public versus private video, plus the follow-up Tick's definitions are wrong video. And they're in alignment with my Fascism Defined video where I define the two distinct ideologies of fascism and National Socialism. So really, the only people who cannot define fascism and National Socialism are the Marxists and the lamestream socialists who refuse to look at the evidence and dismiss all the sources.
In another article titled The Evolution of the Term Third Position, Zoltan writes, "The discussion surrounding the third position underscores its role not simply as an ideology, but as a distinctive term that encapsulates a unique blend of nationalistic socialism, which positions itself firmly against both Marxist and capitalist frameworks. This descriptor encompasses a broad spectrum of beliefs that, while sharing a common nationalistic thread, vary wildly in their specific stances on socialism, racial narratives, and their relationship with facets of fascism. Some within the spectrum may align closely with fascistic elements, whereas others decidedly reject such associations. For individuals who resonate with a nationalistic form of socialism that critiques both Marxism and capitalism, adopting the third position term is a reflection of a deeply personal and ideological alignment. This decision involves a thoughtful examination of the term's historical roots and the diverse array of beliefs it encompasses. Understanding the third position as a descriptor requires recognizing its significance as a label that not only identifies a specific stance within the broader socialist tradition, but also delineates a clear opposition to the prevailing economics of Marxism and capitalism." He then quotes from Gregor Strasser, "We must take from the right nationalism without capitalism, and from the left socialism without internationalism."
I will give them credit where credit is due. Third positionists like Keith Woods and Zoltan are more clued in than most people are. They are highly intelligent individuals who are steeped in philosophy and have identified issues with the current system that often do lead to moral decay and lack of purpose. Nihilism is an issue, even though there is an answer to nihilism, but again, that's not the purpose of this video. But I should also point out that despite being an answer to liberalism, and despite being against Marxism, it's absolutely clear that third positionists have got an incredibly poor understanding of what free markets are. They do not understand basic economics, and Keith Woods merely rejects economics as logistical arguments. They may know what liberal capitalism is, but they wrongly assume that all capitalists are liberals, materialists, relativists, nominalists, and empiricists. They believe that free market guys like myself are capitalists, and that there's no distinction between the two. They believe that free markets lead to capitalism, which is false. And they believe that free markets are immoral and lead to degeneracy. Also false. In fact, the opposite is true. They believe that capitalists and free market guys do not have a solid philosophy supporting their ideas. And to be fair, most of them don't. Some are really clueless. But if you think that someone like myself just wants to be selfishly greedy for the sake of being greedy, and just live a meaningless hedonistic existence, That would be a mistake. I'm none of that. In fact, I reject liberalism, materialism, relativism, nominalism, empiricism, idealism, and nihilism. Yes, it is true, some capitalists who are more of the old-fashioned or ignorant types do not adhere to a philosophy, or maybe they adhere to a religion that contains a philosophy that the third positionists are more familiar with, but that doesn't mean that all capitalists and free market guys are like them, or that everyone is like that. Generally, such people are too busy living their lives and carving out a piece of the world for themselves to be thinking of the metaphysical, ontological, and ethical issues that philosophers are pondering. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a coherent philosophy behind capitalism and/or free markets, nor is that philosophy materialist. Just like it's a mistake for the Marxians to claim that fascism doesn't have a coherent philosophy, it would also be a mistake to believe that capitalists and free market adherents do not have a coherent philosophy either. Not all capitalists and free market adherents know or can articulate that philosophy, but it does exist. The problem is that the third positionists have never looked into that philosophy either, and so they falsely assume it's evil or doesn't exist. The purpose of this video was to open the book on third positionism and get more people to realise that it's not what it's often made out to be. It's to show that the vast majority of people do not know what fascism is, have no clue how intellectual and philosophical the ideology actually is, and also show that the majority of social influencers, especially Marxians, are just completely ignorant when it comes to this topic. Keith Woods rightly points this out in one of his videos, where he says that in order to even enter into a public discussion, you have to agree with the same principles. You can't question the fundamentals, because if you did say something outside of the accepted norms, you would be thrown out instantly. And that's happened to me. Hitler is a socialist. Ooh, my fifis, let's get him. When discussions like this are had, people react rather than reflect. They get triggered rather than think. It's not possible to have such discussions without being in constant fear that your YouTube channel is going to get nuked. And it's ridiculous. Many people are self-censoring their minds from alternative ideas, and to such people, I just need to point out, you can read Mein Kampf without agreeing with it. You can read the Communist Manifesto with a critical mind. You can read Mises and Rothbard and whatever without having to become an ANCAP. You don't need to live in ignorance. But no, we don't live in such enlightened times. Instead of reading Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt or The Cause of Hitler's Germany by Leonard Peikoff, we're going to just dismiss them. It's far easier just to assume things about other people and their ideas than it is to actually venture forth into new territory and understand what they're actually saying. But I deliberately placed these two books here for a reason. Everybody who's made it to this point of the video should read these two books. If you haven't read them already, you need to make them a priority, especially if you're a third positionist. I've listened to you and understood what you guys have had to say, and I'm not dismissing your views, so I ask in return that you don't dismiss mine. If you're willing to read Nietzsche and Julius Evola, then you can easily find the time to read these two books. Maybe start with Peikoff. But either way, there's no reason why you shouldn't. And everybody, regardless of where you stand, should be reading these two books. They're fantastic. As I said, I'm not going to offer a counter to the third positionist arguments today. That's going to be a whole other video. But I hope that Keith Woods and Zoltan don't see this as an attack. That, this isn't an attack. All I've done here is merely point out what they're saying and clarifying their positions. And as I said at the beginning, the enemy is the ideology, not the people who have fallen for it. So I hope that they see that I'm just trying to understand the ideology. And if they do respond, I ask that you guys clarify your positions for us. If I've said something that was imprecise, let me know. Spell it out. Make it clear. I also know people will ask me to do it, so I'll just state it now. I don't do live debates. Live debates are a waste of time in my view. I'd much rather have time to carefully craft and consider my response than do a live debate. And you can see examples of my carefully crafted responses in my other videos on the ideologies in question. Check them out. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.